So I want to start by introducing actually our first TED speaker is Sandy Bates. Sandy is the founder of Innovation Partners and the author of this really fabulous book upon which she will speak. It's called The Social Innovation Imperative, and this is her last one, so you can't have this one, but you can get this one through Amazon, right?
Amazon, yeah.
Through Amazon. So I highly recommend that you learn a little bit about it in her presentation and go online and learn a little bit more. Sandy?
Great. Well, thank you, Anne, and thanks for having me here. I'm actually filling in, so I had, 24, not even 24 hours notice, so you get what you get. But so how many of you consider yourselves social innovators? Social entrepreneurs? Okay. My goal by the end of today is that you will all raise your hand, okay? Because it's something that is and should be pervasive throughout every organization. So when we think about social innovation, there's three P's. There's people, there's the planet, and there's profits. And a lot of people kind of think of that last P and go, those don't go together. But they really do. And we're going to talk about why they go together. And to start, I want to explain this story. It was actually something that really changed my thinking about how innovation works and what social innovation is. A good friend of mine, in her retirement years, she's a grandmother of 10, maybe that's why she chose South Sudan, but she decided to spend her later years in South Sudan. She's a retired nurse, and she worked with a clinic that treated malnourished children. And one of the stories that she shared with me is about this young child that came in. His name is Boyo, and his mother had brought him in, and he was so severely malnourished that he had a hole in the size of his cheek, the size of a quarter. And typically to treat something like that, the field clinic would have had to house this child for at least a week, probably 2 weeks, on IV nutrients. The mother would have had to stay there with the child. He would have needed to take up a hospital bed or field hospital bed. And that mother would have had to figure out what to do with her other 4 children because they walked probably about 10 hours to get to the clinic. And instead of that kind of real extensive treatment, Boyo was given a therapeutic food substance called plumpy nut. How many of you have heard of plumpy nut? In this country, oh, good. In this country, most people have not. Plumpy nut is a ready-to-eat therapeutic packaged food that's essentially like a peanut butter paste. It's like a Go-Gurt, but with peanut butter and a lot of nutrients. And this substance, it doesn't require any mixing, no fresh water, no refrigeration, and it comes in a packet about this big. And best of all, the kids love it. They can't get enough of it. So when you think about that from an innovation standpoint, and like the panel just talked about, it solves a problem, right? But with social innovation, one of the biggest challenges is you can't solve just one person's problem, okay? If they had just looked at how do we solve the problem of the parent or how do we solve the problem of the child, it would have failed miserably. And there are several solutions out there that do attempt to solve one of those, one set of needs. There's boxes of powdered milk, but they require fresh water. They're big and bulky and difficult to transport. And so when Plumpy Nut came up with this solution, it really revolutionized how malnourished children are treated. Anderson Cooper did a story on Plumpy Nut, and they literally equate it with penicillin in terms of its impact on the world for the cost and the return on lives. And so the reason that, like, why should you guys necessarily care as business people, right? Well, this was not developed by a government. It wasn't developed by an NGO, not a nonprofit. It was a mom and pop startup. And at the time, very small company. It's grown 43% year over year, 23% improvement in the quality of lives of its employees and raising their standard of living. And this solution is now in just about every country that has a significant malnutrition problem. So when you think about social innovation, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about creating products and services that don't just hit the bottom line, but that actually also make a difference in the lives of people or on the planet. And so when you think about, I have to get my little cheat sheet here. This is my 45-minute talk that I got down to 10. Okay. All right. Just want to make sure I covered that. So when you think about what most people think about as social businesses or social innovation, oftentimes, like I said, people don't see profit as part of the equation. But when you think about it, doing good and making money is not mutually exclusive. That you can do good and you should make money, okay? And the world is finally starting to realize that. There's some really great books out there. One of them, John Mackey, who's the CEO of Whole Foods, wrote a great book called Conscious Capitalism. Is anybody familiar with that? It's a great book. And in it, how many of you are familiar with Whole Foods? Okay, great. I was like, oh boy, this could be a problem. So in it, he talks about the fact that profits should never be exclusive of doing good. That the best profits you can make will result in products and services that delight the customers, but also are environmentally sound. They create a good work environment for the people involved in them. And so every organization has the option to do what they're doing in a way that benefits the world or in a way that detracts from the world. And so when we think about, and that's why I asked how many of you consider yourselves social entrepreneurs, oftentimes there's this misnomer that social business, you have to be a social business to be a social innovator and a social entrepreneur. And yet most of the major social innovations that have impacted our world are made by for-profit companies, by entrepreneurs and startups. So what is social innovation? So this is one of those terms that if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers. In fact, my parents still don't understand what I do. So, giving them the book, they still don't get. So when you think about social innovation, it's the process by which ideas and solutions are created that are going to do good. And so it's a process and it's about the ideas. It's not about the company. And social innovation is completely industry agnostic or sector agnostic. It's not relegated to the nonprofit sector. It's not relegated to the government sector. It's not relegated to the for-profit sector. But it really takes all of the different groups to work together for these solutions to be successful. If you think about Plumpy Nut, it was a for-profit company, but they had to work with the governments of very corrupt countries. They had to work with major aid agencies to get the food purchased. They have to work with large distribution organizations. Some are NGOs, some are for-profits, all over the place. And so when you think about it, it impacts every sector that we have. And so it can't just be something that is kind of nice to have off to the side for it to be successful. So when you think about what the result is, what is the end goal of social innovation? It's what we call sustainable impact. Okay, those are fine fuzzy words, buzzword bingo, but if you think about those two words, sustainability and impact, impact's obvious, right? You meet the needs of a critical need in the market, but how do you create the sustainable part? And that's what social innovation really seeks to understand, is looking at the entire ecosystem and identifying how can you develop a solution that is really going to address the critical needs of each member of that ecosystem and will require the responsibility of each member of that ecosystem as well. Because it can't just be about one part of the ecosystem demanding and taking at the cost of everybody else. So if you think about Plumpy Nut, had they developed that solution in a way that was beneficial for the parents, but the aid agencies couldn't afford it, the distribution trucks had to be refrigerated, any of those different factors, it would have caused a significant problem in that solution to be sustainable and have the impact that it's having today. So the thing I would encourage you to do is to always look at the ecosystem when you're talking about your market, and this goes for traditional entrepreneurs as well. Most of my career, I've worked with Fortune 500 and startups in the regular for-profit space. And one of the biggest mistakes they made often is that they didn't look at every part of the ecosystem. They would look at their customer. And they didn't look at the adjacencies. They didn't look at the suppliers. They didn't look at certain distributors that could have an influence. And that will bite you in the rear every time, okay? Because if one of those pieces doesn't come together, it's not gonna succeed, not in the long term, okay? Okay, and so the last thing I want to leave you with is the story of the caterpillar. And this was also borrowed from the book, Conscious Capitalism. And in it, John Mackey talks about the fact that a caterpillar, in its version as a caterpillar, eats 100 times its body weight every single day. Does nothing but eat. Nothing else. Doesn't contribute anything. It just eats until nature transforms it. And at that point, it becomes a very vital part of the ecosystem. It's responsible for making sure that we have the food that we need every day. And so it's gone from this consuming entity into a very vital and important part of the world. And he uses that analogy and also makes the connection to people and to companies. We can either be consumers, or we can be consumers and take what we've been consuming and turn it into something bigger and better than what we've taken. And the difference really comes down to intent, because unlike nature, nature takes care of it for the caterpillar. He has no, if he had it his way, he'd probably sit there and keep eating all the rest of his life. Nature says, nope, we're going to spin you up and we're going to turn you into something else. People and companies don't have that. So in some cases, nature will give you a swift kick in the butt, and you will transform, not necessarily the way you wanted to. But it has to be a choice for us, for people and for companies, to say, am I going to just consume, or am I going to consume in a way that does something spectacular in the world? So that's it.
Question for you. And I'm going to let one question, if there's somebody out there, a question for Sandy. I want to know, tell us a little bit about how companies, outside of someone who starts a company to do this, how can companies that currently exist begin to put some sort of social innovation into the work that they do?
Well, that's a good question. And, a lot of companies are doing it. I forgot a big part of what I was going to say. Okay, there is a big reason. Okay, so one of the reasons why this has become such a major movement, and I was talking to Mike earlier, one of the speakers, and asked, well, does the investor community here work on social innovation? And the answer was, well, kind of not really. But there's a perfect storm that's happening right now demographically, and that is that we've got the baby boomers entering their purpose years. So they've kind of done what they needed to do. They made their money. They're looking to leave a legacy. And then we've got the millennials that are coming up, and they are the most socially conscious generation that most people will say that the world has ever seen. And so you've got this perfect combination of leaders who are entering a time in their careers where they're saying, I want to make a difference and leave a mark. And you've got the next generation coming up saying, hey, we're ready, we're here, we're going to make a mark. And so it's becoming an integral part of what the millennials are looking for. When they look for jobs, they're looking to make a difference. And I think a lot of companies are starting to see that it's not going to just be about what products they're making for the market, but what other things, what other opportunities are there for the employees to innovate and do something special.
Are there any questions? Is there anyone who has a question for Sandy? No, you got off easy. Yay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you stepping up like that.
You betcha.
Social innovation imperative.